Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? What do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do at the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, my name's Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. And today's podcast is around long-distance relationships. A lot of relationships can survive with long-distance relationships. And they're fine. No problem with that. You know, it's when, as counsellors, as relationship therapists, we come into contact where people's worlds and lives have changed. So they may have started out with a long-distance relationship, or they may have started out as a close relationship, but then it changes. And change is not easy for human beings. So you might have two people who got together initially, and one was working in another country and one's working here. Now, initially, that will not be a problem usually, because they have their own friend base, they have their own social base, they have their own work, they have their own team, they have probably their own house or flat or place to live. But as they become closer, as they become more connected, more committed, and then those things will start to be shared quite naturally, and they will be in each other's worlds some of that time, and probably in each other's worlds on their own some of that time. So if they start out as a long distance relationship, then those things, as I say, would not be a problem. As they get more connected and connected, maybe they move in together, they may get engaged or married, they may have kids. When that changes to being a close relationship, maybe the person who's working abroad for 3 months of the year, or was on an oil rig, or had a job somewhere that was looking at travel or looking at kind of tourism or whatever, and they were working away from home. Maybe then they get a job because of circumstances next door to where the other person's living. So it's very close. So they instead of not being there for 3 months, they're there every night, for example. Or alternative, the other way around. If they were very close, then get a job that's 3 months away at a time. Those changes massively change the construction of that relationship in all sorts of different ways. I mean, it might be nice to have somebody close there to look after the kids, to help with the kind of running of the house and all those kind of things. But it will impact on their relationship and their life quite naturally because it's changed. So if somebody hasn't been involved in that choice, i.e. maybe the person that was working away got made redundant and they had to get a job nearer home because that was the job they could get. So the person at home would have been impacted quite a bit because they would have their routine when they're not there. They would have things that they would normally do. They would get up, they would do things, they would look after the kids, they would have their own support systems, whatever. They would have run that world in their own way. And now this other person is there that isn't normally there. So that takes an awful lot of talking, sharing, communication before it happens, if possible, where we can do some pre-planning, pre-awareness. If we don't do that pre-planning, pre-awareness, and it becomes a shock to the relationship in a sense, then we have to deal with the waves, the ripples of that. So that person being there in the morning who wouldn't normally be there, that's going to change our routine. It's going to change what we do. Now, it might be that they get asked to do some stuff that they never used to do. So they're going to, well, that's not what I normally do. I normally stay in bed. I normally get up at 6 and go for a run. Whatever it is, their world will have changed. And it's that change that creates the problem. So the change doesn't have to be about long-distance relationships. Can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any change that comes into contact with that relationship that the other person didn't necessarily have a choice or control over. So that process of change, either becoming a long-distance relationship or removing the long distance and becoming a close distance relationship, that change is the process that is the problem. I always say to people, if at all possible, before there's any major changes in your world and your life with anything, have a conversation about how that may or may not affect you. Now, if it hasn't happened, then you'll not really idea is how it's affecting you or how it's going to affect you in reality, but you can have a best guess. So you might say to this person who's working away, okay, before they have to become close in that sense, then okay, so what's that going to be like? What are you going to feel like when you're here every night and you're no longer at work? What about those relationships you had in that long distance relationship? Friends, colleagues, structure. What is going to change? How is it going to change? How are you going to feel about that change? What's that change going to mean for both of us? How is it going to work? What is it going to affect you and me, the both of you, separately and individually, but then the relationship? So trying to have that pre-awareness conversation is helpful. It won't give you what's going to happen fully, obviously, because we can't predict the future. But we can get a sense of what might happen. And a lot of those changes is going to create a ripple, not just for the couple or the couple and the kids, but also for any other person connected to those people, because they would have been connected maybe to family more often than they're going to be. They may be connected to friends more often than they're going to be. So there would be those external changes outside of the relationship and the family that will naturally change. It might change because of the financial input. Maybe working away was more lucrative, so there's going to be less money coming into the household. Now that can make a massive change in how that household is run. So if we have a conversation about that, if we have a structure that we both can have some input on, some ideas about, then we can reorganize our bills maybe. We can change our financial situation. We might not go out as much. We might put money into this instead of that. That we could have some kind of reaction to that change that we're more in control of. Now, that's not saying it's going to completely work, but it's got more chance of working if we're both involved in the process. Similarly, if somebody becomes or has to become a long-distance relationship, then we lose them from our world and our life. We lose that support. We lose that connection, whatever it was. And our world will have to change. We might have to look after the kids more. We might have to change our job. We might have to do some alternatives. And again, if that's been discussed and put together and obviously checked out, tweaked, altered, made different to encompass the change, to make the change better or easier, then we can work the process. But it's this shock stuff that we're not aware of. Yeah. We'll get people coming into the counselling room that have only just got married for a month, 2 months, and all of a sudden the relationship is in turmoil. And it happens. We see it. So that's usually because neither one of them has actually talked about what's it going to be like when we're married. Now, for a lot of people, it's a piece of paper. And it is a piece of paper to an extent. But it seems to have ramifications of commitment, of security, insecurity. It has a lot of components, that piece of paper, that prior to that wedding may not have been there in our mind or in our thoughts or in our understanding. So as we're working that process of getting married, then it's a good idea to have a conversation. What's it going to be like when we are there? What are you going to expect from me? We see things in the counselling room where people have just got married, then they are more disconnected. They spend more time away from each other than they used to in that honeymoon period, so to speak. And that then can be really awkward because that insecurity drive can come on board. Okay, where you going, who you with, all those kind of things can happen quite naturally. And so that process of having a conversation, checking out what this change is going to mean, is going to be easier once we've, or prior to us actually encountering the change, than it will be after the change, because life will have already changed. And those changes might be some that we did sign up to. It might be some that we weren't aware that was going to happen. But it might also be things that we really don't like. And that then could create distance in our relationship. And I don't mean physical distance necessarily, but certainly intimacy and emotional distance, you know. So when we're looking at these processes of long-distance relationships and these changes that occur, and I say the changes can be anything. It doesn't have to be a long-distance relationship, but obviously that's what I'm talking about today, is trying to find a way of connecting together in order to make those changes easier to cope with, more pre-planning, more awareness of what may or may not occur. And moving forward with that, then you would need to tweak those changes because it might not be exactly what you thought was going to happen. They might be slightly different. And having people in your world and your life that weren't there before, or having people not in your world and life that were there before, does make a difference on the relationship. And for some people, they've been used to not being together for 3 months, 2 months, a month, whatever time frame it is. And they can't cope with that. They can't cope with that closeness sometimes. And so they have to go back to what they had previously, which is fine, obviously, as long as the relationship has had that choice, as long as the other person is part of that choice. Those changes that occur in all our relationships, in all our lives really, if we have choice of that change, if we're in control of that change, it's not the same as if we're not in control. If we're not in control of that choice, we feel resentment. We feel as though this is being done to us. We have no choice in that matter. And that can be a really hard thing to come back from. So I suppose what I'm saying in all of this is to get you to think about any changes that you know are going to happen, or as soon as you know it's going to happen, then you have a conversation with the other partner or the family as well. Maybe might involve more than one person. And you get to everybody to have their input on what they're going to do about this change. We find it when there's a thing called the empty nest syndrome, which has been bantered about for years, where the kids kind of get to a point where they leave home and the parents are there on their own. So a function, a job of looking after the kids, getting kids from A to B, all those kind of things, supporting the kids financially, all these things may have changed because the kids naturally are leaving home. But for the parents who used to provide all those things and that time, it can be very hard coping with it because they no longer are needed in the same way. Their carer role will have changed, maybe their provider role may have changed. And the couple are thrown more together. They spend more time with each other because the other people are there to take the time away. And those kind of things can be really hard to reassess, reconnect, and to kind of acclimatise to the process of change. Also with things like retirement, where one person will retire and they have more time at home, less time because they're not at work anymore. And again, those kind of changes can be massive for human beings because our role, our job, our function of whatever we did at work is no longer needed. And sometimes that's a choice. I've left because I want to leave, I want to retire. Sometimes it's an age thing, a health thing. It can be a redundancy thing, you know. So there can be situations where we're in charge of the choice, which is still going to change our lives, obviously. But there are things there where we won't be in charge of that choice. And it's that not being in charge, not being in control, not having a choice that can create the difficulty for us as human beings. So it's about talking, sharing, having conversations, communications about what may or may not happen, and ongoing conversations about, what has happened and do we need to tweak it, alter it, reevaluate it, whatever, in order to be a shared experience, in order to be both parties honestly and openly happy with the choices that's being made. It's all about communication. Most of our work in couple work initially with anything that's going on with the couple is about getting and being able to communicate and using good quality language that's respectful and valuing. And for most of my work initially, that is what I do. That is getting people to talk, to share, to understand each other. And I think for most of us, that's the first part of any change, really. So if there's a change coming, have a conversation. Do not leave it until the end, until it's happened. Not a good idea, shock to the system stuff. Yeah? So have a conversation. Be mindful of the other person's needs, requirements, shared conversation, because they won't be in the same place you are, usually. And then come to terms with that and how it's going to move on, how it's going to change in the future, what we're going to do together to make that work and to make that understood. Hopefully that's been interesting and made you think, which is what these podcasts are all about. And communicate, talk, share. That's what it's all about. Good quality relationships always start with good quality communication. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care. Hi, thanks for listening to the podcast, and hopefully it made sense and was interesting for you. Please subscribe, like and share. With the podcasts, you never know who will be helped by the things we talk about, things we share. We don't normally tell people our problems, but by sharing it and helping other people to understand things. The book Insecurity, It's All About Me, is also available now through Amazon. And it gives you an understanding of what drives insecurity, how insecurity works within our human dynamics, and how you can get a much more secure connection with people. It gives you lots of ideas and thoughts, which is really good. So thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, hit the button. And if you've got any comments, please give me them and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much. Take care.